Welcome to the Whose Body Is It podcast. I'm your host, Isabella Melvin. For those who don't know me, I'm a birth worker, a life coach, hypnotist, and a former liberal feminist turned radical truth teller. On this podcast, I expose the forces at play attempting to control our minds and bodies, such as transgender ideology, pornography, prostitution, and so much more. Together, we'll untangle patriarchal lies as you listen to jaw-dropping interviews with women from around the world. Warning, while listening to this podcast, you might find yourself triggered or perhaps notice where you've been biting your tongue on the issues that matter most to you. In my coaching and hypnosis, I help women and men stop getting triggered by every single thing, cultivate resilience, stop unwanted behaviors, and increase self-confidence. You can book your first session at whosebodyisit.com, and you can find that link in the episode show notes. And I just want to say that it's because of your endless support that I'm able to interview amazing women, get their stories out, and produce regular episodes for you. So with that being said, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And if you're listening in, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And also consider making a financial contribution via the link in my show notes. You can also visit my activist sticker shop. My pro-woman stickers have the power to intercept transhumanist programming. So take a photo of your stickers out in the wild and tag me on Instagram at Whose Body Is It. Without further ado, let's get into this week's story. Jennifer Lahl, author, documentarian, and founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network, returns to the podcast today. Jennifer has been fighting assisted reproductive technology for 20 years. Her interest was piqued when her college-aged daughters were targeted for egg selling. It was during the height of the stem cell research craze, and she realized that this profit-driven medical research was being built on the backs of vulnerable young women. Her first film, Exploitation, earned her the wrath of Big Fertility, but they've hardly celebrated her work since. In her most recent article, she asks, who owns the human body? Examining the ethical implications of using a brain-dead woman's body as a surrogate. If a woman has agreed to be an organ donor, does it follow that her body could be kept on life support in a vegetative state in order to gestate a child for an infertile couple? What about the well-being of the fetus, which will grow surrounded by the sound of beeping monitors instead of the sounds of its mother's voice? Assisted reproductive technology comes with many ethical pitfalls, and we'll explore these as well as the connection to gender ideology in the sterilization of minors. You can learn more from Jennifer at the upcoming event, It's Bigger Than Texas, on April 20th in Austin. This event is hosted by Partners for Ethical Care, and I will be moderating the panel. The day following the panel, Jennifer's film, The Detransition Diaries, will be screened. It's going to be an awesome few days you will not want to miss. Jennifer, you've been on the podcast before. Last time we spoke, we were talking about your film, Transmission. And you are one of the panelists for the upcoming event. It's Bigger Than Texas. That's April 20th. So that's going to be so awesome. I'm moderating that event. I'm really excited to have you in Austin. So that's the plug to come join us in Austin,
Yeah.
April 20th. But before we get into your most recent articles, can you just talk a little bit about how you started talking about the harms and kind of ethical questions around the surrogacy industry?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's actually been kind of many years I've been working in this space, in the whole area of assisted reproductive technology. I mean, I'm a woman. I'm interested in fertility and infertility, as you are with a lot of the work that you've done in your career. I raised three now young adult women daughters. I saw them going to, university and having their school papers advertise, lots of money for them to sell their eggs and become egg donors. So I actually dipped into this whole space in the space of egg donation. And it was at the time when George Bush was the president and the whole country was gripped with this stem cell human cloning debate to use all these surplus embryos to develop new novel cures and treatments, and who could be, against cures and treatments. But there was a few of us that were kind of going, no, wait a minute, we're basically building, highly profit motive treatments and cures off of the reproductive bodies of young women who are going to be required. And when I produced my first film in that space, it was called Eggsploitation. It was at that time when the film came out that we thought, oh, we're really onto something. One, because Big Fertility, I call it Big Fertility, was red hot mad that we would dare make that movie and actually win, film awards for it. So it was like, oh, we've really hit a nerve here. We're onto something. When you poke the beast and the beast howls, you kind of know that you're doing something right. And most people don't realize, just in my writing and speaking, women came to me. So I didn't set out to go find these women. Women were coming to me because they said, here's somebody who's raising the concerns about the health and well-being of young women. Let me tell you my story, because the fertility agency doesn't want to hear from me. They don't want to own up to anything that they've done has caused any of these problems I'm having. And so through that realization at the time when we made Exploitation, we just said, we're going to really peel back the onion and take a deep dive in what's going on. Why do we have now 1 million frozen human embryos in the United States, and climbing? And it's because of this unfettered reproductive technology. Can follow the money. It's very lucrative. It promises all kinds of, you'll get the baby of your dreams. We'll help you. Just give us, piles of money. So, we've made actually 2 films on surrogacy. The first one was called Breeders, a Subclass of Women. And because the debate is always around, should we have surrogacy? If we have surrogacy, how do we have it? Do we allow women to be paid, or only, altruistic women just do it because they're nice? Do we let strangers have babies for strangers? Do we let sisters have babies for sisters? Do we let women have babies for gay couples, family members, all that? And so in that film, we actually interviewed a surrogate who did it for all those different reasons. No money, for helping a family member, for helping a stranger. We actually interviewed women who they were the biological mother in their surrogate arrangement. So their egg and their womb, as well as what they call the horrible gestational carrier, gestational surrogate term. And all of these women had horrible short and long-term complications as it related to their desire to help somebody. And then the last film that we did in surrogacy is called Big Fertility. It's all about the money. And that we followed one young woman in the United States who did domestic as well as international surrogacy, because we wanted to show how the whole reproductive tourism, the global landscape, really is even more harmful, if you will, to women, as couples from all around the world come to America to hire women. So there's I always like to say there's something for everybody to hate about surrogacy.
Right.
Whether you hate the industrial commercialization of women's bodies, whether you are undone by the the haves versus the have-nots. It's always lower income, poor women that are being the surrogates. Whether you're concerned about maternal child health and bonding and all those things that we know are normally natural good that we want to promote with women who are expecting babies, breastfeeding and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am. Still almost 20 years later, fighting this big fertility.
It's wild that the social justice warriors can ignore the big class issue in all of this, which that you've mentioned, that only the people with money can rent the insides women's bodies and by these children. So it is not a like human rights issue. It's not well, it is on the side of obviously the surrogate, but the entitlement around access. I know you talk a lot about in the films. It's all about what the adults want, and I think that was reiterated in your recent piece called "Who Owns the Human Body," where you and maybe I'll let you get into that, but I saw that you mentioned again in there, like, what are the rights of a dying person? What are the rights of a child who's been gestated by a dying woman? And you mentioned the experience of the child in the womb only hearing like beeping, the sounds of like medical technology, versus the sounds of their mother's voice or the father's voice or like the wind or anything other than that. So can you talk about that new proposal, or not so new proposal, that's going on behind the scenes as a kind of a next level of third-party reproductive technology?
Yeah. Well, let me back into it by saying, even like the social justice warrior types who want to, say that this is, a wonderful thing for women to do. It's empowering. It's economically empowering. It's a woman's choice to do whatever she wants with her body, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. So mostly everybody, though, will recognize that surrogacy can be exploitative, can be an unequal arrangement where the haves, have an upper hand over the have-nots. So most people want to say things like, well, we can regulate all those problems away, right? If we have good contracts, if we have good laws on the books, good public policy, Texas, the state where we'll both be seeing each other in person, and, allows for commercial surrogacy as long as if it's a married couple and it's a heterosexual couple. I can't remember if the language of the law requires them to have some kind of infertility. But so everybody tries to think we can manage this. So this one woman who came out with this article that was the, Who Owns the Body piece that I wrote, recognized that surrogacy can be problematic. And so her solution was, well, we'll use brain dead women to become surrogates. And she makes an argument. It's logical on one level as far as it's coherent, by saying if women have already agreed to be organ donors, if they become, brain dead or if they die, the uterus is an organ that they could, include in the language of their organ donor, desires, that their uterus could be used. Now, I worked in hospital clinical nursing for many years and mostly in intensive care. So I do, talk about this woman is not going to be treated in a dignified way, a woman who's clearly dying and just allowed to die, within, minutes or days, however long it takes a body to die once life support is removed from a brain dead person. She's going to be, artificially kept alive for 9 months. And, as the brain dead person is on artificial respiration and mechanical support for 9 months, that the body doesn't like that. The body's trying to die. So, people get infections, people get bed sores, people, their muscles, just wither away, their body is just disintegrating. So I think at one level, it's just an inhumane and an undignified way to treat a dying woman. And then when you look at the child who's in this womb for 9 months, and I know the intensive care setting, nobody sleeps. The lights are on all the time. The sounds of machines are on all the time. The woman is being, manipulated and taken care of. And, there's something always being done to her body, whether it be checking her vital signs, giving her medication, feeding her, turning her, cleaning her, whatever. And you have to think that that's got to be some kind of a traumatic environment. When we talk about artificial wombs, right? Artificial wombs are coming, and people see that as a solution to infertility and not exploiting women for their wombs. But again, it's a mechanical environment, and we're human beings. We're connected. And when you look at mothers and babies during pregnancy. And I talk about how mothers sing to their babies, and they talk, they rub their belly and they rock and they read, and, and their mother lays down and rests and everything gets quiet and still. And the mother's up busy because she's cooking or doing laundry or, and that's a much more natural environment. And then down the road, when that child is old enough, because I assume that they will be told and not lied to, when they find out how they came into the world, I just think that is, who wants to sign their child up to be that first guinea pig that gets gestated in a dying woman's body? It's bizarre to me, and it's cruel, and it's not medicine. It's not the way healthcare providers are to care for us.
Is there anything that could be done to protect ourselves from being one of these women? Like, for example, if I don't, but if I did have on my driver's license that I, am an organ donor, what legal protections can women set up for their own bodies? This is so, obviously this is so frightening. And who will be the first women? So according to this article, or to this woman who has proposed this, does she think that women are going to consent to this, or she's just saying if they are saying that they are organ donors, then we should assume they would also want to do this? How does she think this is going to come? Does she think women are going to volunteer themselves for this? Or
well, I think, like I said, she's because we already have this mechanism in place, right? You either have a dot on your driver's license, or you have an advance directive of, if I can't ever speak for myself, I want you all to know, that I will do X, Y, and Z. For me, I don't have the dot on my driver's license. My family knows and has access to my durable power of attorney for healthcare. And they know my wishes for, if I ever become in that position, what I want to have done with my body. Because I just want my family, people who I know and trust, to know what those wishes are, versus the government or my insurance provider, or even my doctor. So I think within that mechanism that we have in place in the United States, I can't speak to other countries, but in the United States, a woman who doesn't want to do that would have to make her wishes known. And whether that be she puts it in her advance directive so her family knows, I'm happy to donate my kidneys if I'm dead, but I don't want to be a surrogate. I don't want to be kept alive for 9 months to gestate somebody's baby. You would just have to spell it out. But I think if you don't spell it out and you just are a generic organ donor, the law is you have designated yourself as an organ donor, which means they can take your eyes, your ears, your liver, your kidney, your skin, kind of like pick over your carcass and just take whatever they can use. So I think in people who want to do some kind of organ donation, but not this, they would have to just explicitly state that, or they would just have to say, I don't want to be an organ donor at all. Versus it just assumed if you check that little box and whatever we want to do is okay. Now, I think when she wrote this, it was more of a hypothetical. I don't think she wasn't moving to let's introduce this as policy. It was just, here's an idea I have. Here's how I think it could work. She says, which is true, we already keep, pregnant women who are pregnant with their own child alive. So for example, a woman who's 6 or 7 or 8 months pregnant is involved in a serious car accident. And, there's been disputed cases on both sides where families wanted to keep the woman alive long enough to allow a live birth, the child to be delivered alive. And there's also been families who have said, no, we just want to let her die. We don't want to keep her alive. And that means that probably the baby might die too. And I think those are decisions that should be allowed on either case. And that gets me into trouble, especially if I'm talking to pro-life people, because they think no matter what, the woman must be kept alive so that the baby can, grow longer in the womb in order to be viable at birth. And to me, that's problematic, because then there's no reason to say what other things we couldn't keep women alive for.
Right.
To be brain dead surrogates.
Right.
If we're not willing to say we don't keep people alive, even if the end is good. The means to that end or not means that I embrace.
Oh my gosh, thank you for naming that. Yes, this came up.
Like I said, I'm gonna get emails because people will say, we can keep that woman alive long enough so her baby's born, okay, but we can't let her die because the baby's got to be saved at all costs. And I just, like I said, there's no bottom to that.
Right. Mary Lou talked about this in our episode where we were on what will happen to women if and when, it's already happened, medical abortion is criminalized. And she said it comes down to her as do you believe that a person should be an unwilling life support for another person? So do you believe that and again, in this case, we're talking about a woman who isn't, brain dead or in a coma. But at the end of the day, do you believe that one person should be expected to be an unwilling life support for another person? And I guess in the case of people arguing that a woman should be kept alive in order to have a live birth, that their answer would be yes. I do believe that she should be, because I mean, there's an unwillingness just in the state of her body. Like consciously, we can't know maybe what she would want in that case unless she's written it out. But
Right.
The body is saying this is not a hospitable environment to keep growing life. Like, I mean, the body is, depending on what's going on, the body is shutting down, but it gets, obviously there's a lot more there,
Yeah,
but yeah.
And because I am in the space more of biotech, woo-woo medical advances, there would be no argument to say, well, why we couldn't just keep people alive to test new drugs on them.
Right.
If we need clinical trials on human beings, why we couldn't, do all kinds of experimentation on them, because, and the woman that wrote this, article proposing brain dead women be used as surrogates was quite callous, and that this woman's, has no life. Her sole purpose is to be, she called it a fetal container. So if we're going to be so callous to the dead and the dying that we can keep them alive, you can just imagine all kinds of Mengele, Nuremberg trial kind of experimentations that we could say, well, we won't move the clinical trials to actually healthy human beings that want to be involved in a clinical trial. We'll use these as the interim to understand more. And, I just think it's hugely problematic. Even if, like I said, even if the end goal is something good that we all want, like the George Bush days, people were saying, we're going to cure all these people. And I was saying, yeah, but we're going to make a lot of women sick and unwell and ruin their future fertility so that we can cure people with diabetes and Parkinson's disease, which cures for those diseases would be wonderful. But again, the means to getting to there is problematic.
You had mentioned earlier that your in part your intro to exposing kind of the harms of third-party reproductive technology was through your daughters being targeted to become egg donors or to sell their eggs and whatnot. And I definitely experienced that in my mid-20s, just on like Instagram ads and Facebook ads, but more as like preservation for myself, like come to this like champagne hour pop-up egg, like they were literally like champagne happy hour pop-up clinics where you would get to learn all about the benefits of freezing your eggs. And so that I know that is covered in your amazing film Exploitation, which I found out about through a book called Everything Below the Waist. It's Jennifer Block's book. So in Exploitation, you go into, why that's harmful. We're not going to do a whole episode on that. But for anyone who wants to know, like, why is egg freezing bad? That's all in your film. But on that note, in terms of like body parts being used for things, I do want to kind of ask you perhaps to talk about the legal gray zone of all of those eggs that are being retrieved, like, for example, and for anyone who's kind of listening who doesn't know exactly what happens, a woman who is either donating or selling or storing for her own purposes down the line will go through the same process of kind of taking medication, which overstimulate her reproductive system to produce like as many eggs as possible. And then she's told, hey, we got 10 or we got 12 or we got whatever. But there's no way for her to really know how many. And like I'm curious about the legal obligation of these clinics to, one, be honest and transparent about how many eggs they've actually retrieved, and then what legal rights she has after that's done. Where do the eggs, in my short way of asking is, where do the eggs go and how do we know?
Yeah, we don't know. And that's really weird because when I worked in hospitals, if you took anything out of a human body, it got barcoded and marked. If you were a blood donor, the blood goes in a bag and it gets a barcode, and we know that this was, Isabella's blood on this day we collected it. If you take somebody's gallbladder out, it goes to pathology with a date. We took Mr. Jones's gallbladder out, and an egg and sperm come out of the body, and we don't know. They don't get a barcode. They don't get in a database. We don't say, well, these are Susie Q's eggs, and they all went and got frozen at fertility happy egg clinic down the road. She has no legal right, and most of the time when she's agreeing to be an egg donor, and I say donor in quotes because mostly women are being paid, they wouldn't be doing this if they weren't being paid. She's told that maybe how many they got, but she doesn't know where they end up. So, one of the women in the film, they got 60 eggs, 60. Now, once those eggs left her body, they were not hers. She was paid for them, right? She was compensated. These are now the eggs that are owned by the clinic, and that clinic can then broker them. They can give 2 to this couple. They can give 4 to this couple. All these couples could be creating children from this one particular donor's eggs. These children might grow up in maybe the same region, the same neighborhood, or not. Basically half siblings. And maybe someday through DNA testing find each other, which is a lot of what these children, now adults, are doing through, that we're here because of sperm or egg donation. But it's not, the egg isn't her property. She doesn't have ownership over the eggs because she's contractually agreed to, you can have my eggs and you pay me this amount of money. And it's sad again because we don't track these women. So one of the my colleagues and I, we were able to get, it was quite difficult to get in the medical literature, just a case study. And we wanted to report on 5 otherwise very young, healthy egg donors who, as very young women, were diagnosed with breast cancer. And we know that egg donors are screened out. If you have a history of breast cancer, nobody wants to buy your eggs. They just won't buy your eggs. So we know that egg donors are already selected out. So they don't have a history. And we know that breast cancer doesn't normally strike young women. It's a much older cancer that women get, not in their late 20s, early 30s. So we just tried to report on these 5 women because I would love to know, and I don't want women to do this because it's harmful and it's too risky. You may not have any of the risk, but it's like the smoker who doesn't get lung cancer, but we still say, don't take the risk. It's not worth it. But I would love to know retrospectively how many women now who are being diagnosed with either breast cancers or other reproductive cancers and or their problems with their own fertility had in their past that they were egg donors. Because I think that data would be very telling. Instead of out of the blue, we have and we know that breast cancer has many other components to it, environmental, health issues, some of it's familial, genetic. But I think we would, the tagline of Eggsploitation is the dirty little secrets. I think there's a lot of dirty little secrets that women are unaware of, not realizing that what they think is doing a good, wonderful thing today is going to, be negatively impacting their health down the road.
It's just a ripple effect of like terrible things, like internally, externally, like monetarily. I mean, it's like kind of it's just a losing, the only short-term thing you could argue that is happening that is positive, right, is that they are getting some amount of money in the short term, but as you talk about in the film, they tend to incur a lot of medical expenses and kind of psychological damage, just as a result. I mean, I'm thinking of like, did you watch Three Identical Strangers?
I did. Isn't that an amazing film? It's such a good film.
It was so good, so powerful. For those who haven't seen it, it's the story of a set of identical triplets who were given up for adoption, and a like crazy psychologist capitalized on this kind of control group and put the three boys in three different homes, and unknowingly, or not to the adopted parents' knowledge, or to obviously the little boy's knowledge, they were being studied throughout their childhood. They were told it was like about adoption, but they didn't disclose. And the parents their adoptive parents didn't know they were one of three either. So, these are just not questions women are thinking about. Like, oh, if I donate or sell my eggs and they result in twins, or even they put two of them in the same house, and you have no control over what happens to your biological offspring. Like, you'd want to think, oh, they're going to go to a good home, or they're going to go to parents who really want them, but that is completely out of your control. So you think about like your offspring. Okay, you want to make some money, you think you're doing a good thing, but then to consider the like scary human experiment possibilities that are available when you introduce a technology like this, which is, kind of what you talk about in your work. It's really scary, but most people are not going to that place, right? Because we want to just believe that this is just going like for a good cause to a nice, family who couldn't have kids.
Yeah, who'd be excellent parents. And you don't know. I mean, two of the women in exploitation lost their ability to have children of their own. So they have to live with the realization that they have biological children out there somewhere, but they will never be able to, welcome into their own home their own biological children. One woman, whose daughter died of, selling her eggs from cancer, she realizes she'll never have grandchildren. I mean, it is a ripple. It's a ripple. When you look in the situation of surrogacy, you're oftentimes, especially in the case of you're giving your babies literally to strangers, you don't know who these people are. There's that creepy bazillionaire Japanese guy that was in custody of all like 13 babies. He had at one time all these surrogate mothers. And that those surrogates were pregnant with eggs from donor women who were just answering an ad thinking they're helping somebody have a baby. And they don't know that, in fact, their eggs are in some third world country, poor, impoverished woman's womb to become a child harem for some rich, single Japanese guy. I mean, it's creepy. And, but here's this little young girl who sees an ad and says, oh, I could sure use $12,000. And she in her mind thinks that this is, the Leave It to Beaver, the Cleaver family that the baby's going to be raised in some home with a white picket fence. It's crazy.
It's so wild. It's so wild.
And, we were, Callie, my partner, and I, we were on a call yesterday because there's been new legislation introduced at the federal level. And then there's several states that are introducing, and it's called the right to build a family. So it's under this, big heading of the right to build a family. And part of it is because we are living in a difficult time in the United States post Roe versus Wade. And as more conservative states and more red states and more blue states and liberal states are all lobbying to what are they going to, because, the Supreme Court said we're going to turn it back to the states to decide. And so there's going to be federal legislation and state legislation that want to protect the right to build a family through assisted reproduction, through third-party egg, sperm, whatever. You don't have to be infertile. You don't have to be, heterosexual. You don't have to be married. You just have a blanket right to build a family. And I think part of that's coming from the fact that we've never, as a country, really reconciled assisted reproduction, because all of us have been, it's just good. It's just a good way to help people who would be great parents have children, and what could be wrong with it. And now it's going to come back, and I think we're going to see 50 more years of fighting around that, because because the template legislation coming at the federal level it's very thin. Basically, the government has no business telling you at all how you can build your family. And any infringement on that right. And, I like my rights. I kind of want to leave the state I live in because I don't feel like I have my rights, the rights that I want. Mm-hmm. So, we all have to sort of reconcile, what does this right mean? And for me, the right ends when my right means I have to exploit another person. I have to harm or risk another woman's body, health, life, whatever. My right, ends when I'm doing something that might put children in harm's way. So it's going to be a really busy couple of years for us that doing the work we do. And they're doing all the right thing as far as introducing this legislation. They've got their military shored up because Patty Murray, the senator from Washington State, wants to make sure that the military as a benefit have right to assisted reproduction technologies. So if our military gets wounded on the battlefield and for some reason that means they lost their ability to, reproduce, procreate, have a baby, their sperm, their testicles are blown off, whatever. So that will play to the more conservative base in America that's very pro-military. Wants our military wounded vets to have access to care. They're one of the leading sponsors of this legislation is Tammy Duckworth, who's a military wounded vet, senator from Illinois, who lost her legs, in combat. And so she's endorsing this bill, to the right to build a family. And of course, they have the American Society of Reproductive Medicine and, the typical Big Fertility professional bodies embracing it. And I'm sure the LGBTQ plus people will get on board with the right to build a family because they're going to want, their access to all the bits and pieces that they don't have and that they need. It's going to be a real CF, as we say.
Thank you for speaking to. I was just going to ask, where do you see, how do you see it being pushed on both the right and the left? And you answered the question. They're just appealing to the different kind of cultural aspects of both. And so for the left, it might be LGBT. And for the right, it's like almost an insurance, like you give your life to this country or you give your body to this country, and we're going to make sure that you have options. Right. Should as you said, your testicles get blown up. So that's, oh my God, it's so wild. I was recently asked on Instagram, what is happening to the body parts of trans medicalized men and women? So, like what happens to the healthy breast tissue of women who have had double mastectomy? What happens to, a penis that's been removed for a man who, is going to, quote, get a neo vagina? And yeah, I was wondering if you knew any, we were talking about kind of the legal gray zone or the lack of transparency around like egg donation. What do you think is going on with like the medical sales of the healthy uteruses, for example, that are being taken out of women under the guise of, gender identity medicine?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I don't have the answer to that. I can speculate. I mean, when I think about the years and years I spent in hospitals, when some, this is all stuff that's happening in an operating room, right? You take the patient in the operating room, you cut off their healthy breasts, you take out their perfectly beautiful uterus, you chop off their healthy penis and testicles. I mean, it all ends up in the pathology lab. I mean, that's where it leaves the operating room and it goes to pathology. It doesn't leave the operating room and get thrown on a truck that goes off to some lab where they're doing experimentation. So once it gets to pathology, I don't know. I don't know what the laws are as far as, has this person, signed away their right, they can't say, once you chop off my healthy breasts, please put them in a jar. I'd like to take them home with me. You can't do that. So we know that the person who has surrendered their body parts doesn't have ownership. Again, my article, who owns the body and who owns the body parts? But I don't know. I think they're probably, because I know that it happens at major universities. I know that there's commingling between the researchers and the fertility clinics. So like, we get all these eggs and, we make all these embryos and we're not going to use them all. They go to the researchers without people knowing about that. It's just sort of a, hey, we've got extra. So I guess I could imagine that there would be people that would be doing research, say on breast cancer, and we have all this breast tissue. Would you, I don't know, but I can imagine that it's not like tinfoil hat stuff that I'm saying. But I don't know if there are laws in place to allow that to happen, or if there's laws in place that put in systems of how it can happen, if it's allowed to happen. I'm going to poke around. Maybe I'll write something on that if I find out.
Well, Dr. Suzanne Forbes-Vierling talked about the medical sales of placentas and how there's a legal gray zone there. And as you mentioned, even to take your placenta out of the hospital is quite tricky. And like as a doula, that was one of my roles, is to kind of sneak it in the Tupperware and put it on ice, while the nurses aren't looking. But I was yelled at and caught many times. But women wanted to take them home, rightfully, they grew them, but they technically did sign somewhere that it's actually not theirs. So yeah, as far as I understand with the placentas, it is a legal gray zone. And then
what they would be used for?
Yes. So yeah, Dr. Suzanne talked a lot about the medical sales companies that partner with the hospitals. And I've talked to some of these owners of the medical sales companies, like med spas, and they are very transparent about how awesome the placenta is for their purposes, which is to sell laser treatments for skin and help men grow hair back, and all sorts of like spa-like services, cosmetic services that come from the Wharton's jelly, the umbilical cord, the placental tissue, the blood, and whatnot. So there's like medicinal qualities there, but doesn't excuse obviously being like stolen. Like the profit margins are huge. So it had me thinking, okay, well, if that's happening, there's got to be other medical sales companies who are like also buying the uteruses. I think it's probably a similar answer, which is that it's kind of uncharted territory. Like there aren't, like the technology is moving so fast that the laws aren't there yet to support whatever's going on covertly, like around this. But I also came across an article, and I wonder if you could speak to this too, about a uterine transplant for a woman in, I think it was Ohio, where they were able to successfully give her a uterine transplant. She was able to carry a child, allegedly, if you want to like believe that this is even real, because I don't know what the hell. It's like a whole psyop, but who knows? But then the article says that she had to get the uterus that was not hers eventually taken out because of like some kind of sepsis or infection.
Yeah. I remember that case, but I don't remember that she actually had a baby. I think she had to have the uterus removed before she had a pregnancy. And I think it was Ohio, because I believe it was Cleveland Clinic where this uterine transplant happened. The success on uterine transplants is pretty dismal. And Callie's written about it, and we both have written about it. Our new film, the Detransition Diaries, is coming out in book this year. And, we have a very long chapter on, the history of how we got to where we are today in medicine. And we address the uterine transplants. I think there was a woman in Brazil who had a uterine transplant and did have a successful live birth. I think that baby is still alive. That may be the only one. There's been a couple of women that had uterine transplants, and the babies were born but didn't live very long at all. Most of the time it doesn't, and it hasn't, but that's the good and the bad of all this experimentation. It takes a lot of failures, right, to then get it right. And meanwhile, these women and their children, the unborn, future children, are going to be guinea pigs. And what people don't realize, the woman has a C-section to have the uterus put in. Then she has to take anti-rejection drugs for the whole duration of the pregnancy to not reject the uterus. We don't have any idea of the impact on the developing fetus, embryo that's, being exposed to anti-rejection drugs. If the woman wants to not stay on anti-rejection drugs, she has to have a hysterectomy after delivery to have the uterus removed. but she also has to have a C-section to have the baby delivered, because we're not delivering babies via vaginally on uterine transplants. So this woman is having like basically 3 C-sections, 3 surgeries to have one baby, to put the uterus in, to have the baby, and then take the uterus out. Or she has to stay on anti-rejection drugs. And some proposals say yes, because she may want to have another baby in a couple years. So for a couple years longer, she'll stay on this medication to not reject this. And now we have men that want uterine transplant. So
Right.
it's
so bad.
It's crazy.
Oh my gosh, that had not occurred to me. Yeah, that's 3 different C-sections. So I looked it up, and it looks like, if we want to believe what they wrote, it's a baby born via uterine transplant. So Cleveland Clinic's clinical trial milestones: became the first in North America to deliver a baby from a deceased donor uterine transplant in 2019, performed their first embryo transfer in a uterus recipient, resulting in pregnancy in 2018, and then performed the nation's first uterine transplant in 2016, which was removed in 2016, also later that year, a month later, due to a candida infection.
I think that's the one I'm thinking of. So she didn't have the baby, correct? It was earlier. Yeah. But it's all so experimental. And I understand the heartbreak of fertility and fertility. I understand that. I don't ever want to have people think that I don't care about people that have those, sad realities.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I think, is it so important to who we are as women that we have to do what I see as extreme and potentially seriously harmful, detrimental to your health and or your future child's health, these jiu-jitsu moves to have a baby? Is our life incomplete if we can't have that?
Right.
And I think that's something that we have to come to terms with as a society. You're still a wonderful human being, as women. We're still women with all the wonderful qualities and capabilities of women, and we can mother and nurture in all kinds of ways, even if we don't have our own children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah. Well, perhaps we can end or move into the other piece that you wrote recently about the mice that was created by 2 cell lines from a male mice. I don't even understand what I was reading. It's all very scientific. But yeah, would you maybe talk about that?
Yeah. So some, I've been fighting, to keep your hands off women's ovaries, keep your hands off women's wombs, leave women's reproductive bodies alone. And so, some scientists have thought, well, we can make egg and sperm, right? So there's been a lot of research and work in trying to just synthetically manufacture egg and sperm. Then we won't need sperm donors. We won't need to harm women's eggs. We can, just make egg and sperm in the lab. And, again, it gets me back to, is this safe? Do you want to be the first person who signed your children up to be made by synthetic egg and sperm grown in a uterus? So this particular story was, the scientists took the male DNA, the male sperm. And when you think back to the embryonic stem cell debate of the George Bush era, everybody wanted the embryonic stem cell debates, the iPS cells there, because think of it as a job description. If you're at that embryonic level of a cell, you haven't been given your job description yet. You don't know yet if you're going to grow up to be brain cells or bone cells or blood cells or make livers. And so the scientists wanted those cells because they could manipulate them. They could say, we're not going to let you grow up and figure out what you were designed to be. We're going to manipulate you to become a brain cell or to become a bone cell. And so the scientists were after that, because if you were just doing breast cancer research, you could take these embryonic cells and make them grow up to be breast cells and do your research on, a specific cell line. So that was kind of the holy grail. So these scientists said, well, we'll just take the cells from the man, we'll turn them back to their embryonic-like state, and then we'll program to be an XX. So from the male, they took the embryonic-like cells and sort of reprogrammed them to be female. Does that make sense?
I see. Okay.
So now they didn't need a woman, right? Because they were just able to use the cells from a man, reprogrammed back to the embryonic state and manipulate them, and voila, they made the mice. Since I wrote the article, I've tested out so many like illustration, like how could I illustrate this? And
Right.
I always bring myself back to the kitchen and try to like, okay, you're making a cake and you normally make the cake this way, but you change something in the recipe and you make it this way and it's still a cake, you know? So, and I don't know if that works. I don't know if that helps it at all, but you know, you have these two male gametes and you needed a male and a female gamete to make the baby. So you change the male one to become the female one, and then you put them together. Okay. And so you still had a mice. People would say, well, is that still a mice? I would argue it's still a mice. It's a manufactured, it's a, you know, human made. You know, when you look at when we cloned Dolly the sheep, at first Dolly the sheep seemed fine. And then Dolly the sheep got really, really fat and obese and unhealthy and had to be euthanized. But at first, you know, Dolly the sheep looked like a sheep, even though she was made through cloning. So the argument is that by doing this, that we can do all kinds of, we can help women and men conceive that have infertility issues. Like, you know, we wouldn't have to have an egg donor. We could just use your husband and we could turn, you know, his gametes, and we keep some of his gametes male and turn some of his gamete cells into, you know, female and make eggs out of his sperm cells.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, this is all being like, the product in this case are mice. The products are mice. So this isn't, you know, how far are they from doing what you just described, like for an infertile couple?
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't have that kind of like, you know, vision into the future. I think we're closer to artificial wombs than we are to doing this technology at the gamete level, with, you know, taking the cells from two men and allowing them to, you know, recreate what the woman would contribute using their own cells. I think that's farther on down the line. But also I am concerned because, you know, we have this whole area called CRISPR technology, which is the gene editing, where we can go in and find the gene that we don't like and knock it out or cut it out. And that for a while was put on the back burner because people were saying, we don't know if this is safe. But, you know, now we're kind of becoming more comfortable with it. And the scientific community is feeling more like we should move forward because, you know, we might be just minutes away from all these breakthroughs from cure. Again, it gets back to curing disease, you know, and I kind of go, well, we're all going to die. And why don't we spend a lot more of our resources in getting people just healthy? I like to fight diseases. I don't like to be sick, you know, but everything is just motivated by our inability to recognize that we are eventually going to become sick or die or get a cancer or whatever. And shouldn't medicine and science and technology and all these breakthroughs advance with a lot more ethical caution, guardrails? And you know, why nobody foresaw that we'd have 1 million frozen human embryos in the United States. And many of them are just, you know, there was some couple that just rescued 2 frozen embryos, and the embryos had been frozen for 30 years. And the husband and wife who rescued these embryos weren't even born when these embryos were created and stuck in the freezer. And everybody was going, isn't this wonderful? Isn't this great? Oh my God, this is amazing, this family. And I'm going, that's just human experimentation. That's just...
And the baby was born, right?
Yeah.
And the baby's living
I think it was twins even. I'd have to go back and refresh my memory. But I just remember thinking these embryos, because it was embryos, were frozen before this husband and wife, this couple, whatever, were even born. And I'm just like, that is just, one, it's bizarre. It's freaky, scary. We don't know what the impact of freezing ourselves at that tiny little early stage of human development. I mean, I wouldn't eat hamburger in my freezer that had been in there for 30 years, let
Yeah,
alone pull my kids out and say, well, we're ready for you now. I don't know. It's bizarre.
that
But
is
yeah, people
wild.
were celebrating it, and it's kind of like the mean party pooper going, I don't think that's a good thing to do. You know.
It is such a crisis. Yeah, what this has led to. I mean, I supported so many. I mean, when I was in New York as a doula, a third probably of my clients had gone through IVF. I supported one woman who was 48 who was carrying an egg donor's egg. So an embryo made from an egg donor and then her husband's sperm. And a lot of them were really transparent about like how complicated it was and that they thought that there actually should be gatekeeping around it and how it is totally bizarre and weird to have, another embryo stored somewhere and they don't know if they want to have another kid, but they don't want to destroy it, but they're paying the storage fees for it and how how utterly bizarre and like admitting that they like, I think on some level, this is my projection, but hadn't thought it through all the way, hadn't thought it through to its logical conclusion or unknown conclusion or open-ended, possibilities.
Well, and I know, you and Jennifer Belak and us, the whole transhumanist remaking humanity, we're going to become post-human, we're going to become something other. The more we just sort of surrender and give away our bodies to technology, to fix, to treat, to cure, to manipulate, to do whatever, we're just sort of signing, we're agreeing to this.
Mm.
And for people like me and you and others who try to do the stop and the wait, we're, fear mongering, we're Luddites, we're all kinds of the phobias and bigots and whatever, you just want people to die. I'm like, well, no, I don't just want people to die, but I want people to live, the best life they can live naturally, and whether that's a life of 10 years or a life of 100 years, we just sort of, are happy with, the life that we get, knowing that we've done what we could to take care of our bodies. So I don't know how, people always say, can you put the genie back in the bottle? I think it was Mary Lou. It might have been on your show, but I heard her say it on somebody's show. But, it's just hard to say no to technology. And you see that with pregnant women.
Mm-hmm.
You get this test and you get that test and you have this monitor and you do this. And it's hard to say no because you're basically being told you need this. And you've got this authority figure, your physician, your trusted whoever, telling you that you need to do this. We saw that with, COVID and the vaccines, and you need to do this and you need to do this. And, and it's for the people who pushed back and said, thank you, no, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to the people who don't hop on the bus, and I see that so much in healthcare. That how soon when I watched Gattaca, the movie Gattaca, which I don't know if any of your listeners have watched it, but it's a great movie, but it came out when I was in graduate school. It was a sci-fi. If you watch Gattaca now, Gattaca's like mainstream. It was a good Uma Thurman, Ethan Hawke movie all about designer children and why would you want to leave anything to chance? Why would you want to just have a child the old-fashioned way and roll the odds that your child might not be perfect and, go to the clinic and we can make sure that you get the child exactly what you want to your specification, and how soon people feel like, well, they have to do that or they're not good parents.
Right. Or it's a way to, was it, I think you must have shared this where it was like, they were promoting that you could like, rule out certain mental illnesses or they're like lying. Basically, it's just total lies, but they're like, hey, if you do this kind of gene selection, you can opt out of Alzheimer's or you can opt out of schizophrenia or like, some kind of false promise to get people on board. But I have had friends talk to me about this, that their family members are considering doing these technologies because they think that this is their out. Like what you said, like why leave it to chance when you
Right.
could,
Why
not.
why let Mother Nature screw up for you? And I don't want to be a spoiler alert, but in the movie Gattaca, the husband and wife, had a child the old-fashioned way, and then they had the gene rich, child. And of course, the gene, you can't predict that your child is going to be what they tell you're going to be. I mean, they always joke about what if you could clone Tiger Woods, would you clone Tiger Woods? Well, what if the clone of Tiger Woods hates golf? Or what if the clone of Tiger Woods gets hit by a bus and ends up in a wheelchair? And then you're disappointed because, well, you wanted a child that had, these kind of capabilities and these kind of talents, and they're either A, not interested, or B, circumstances rendered them unable to fill that. And you see that in surrogacy with these contracts with these people who said, like Kelly and Big Fertility, one couple paid for sex selection and they transferred a boy and a girl embryo. And they paid for extra because they wanted a boy and a girl. And what happened was she miscarried the girl embryo and the boy embryo split. But they didn't know that. They didn't know that until the ultrasound. And when Kelly said, I'm having 2 boys, and she thought they would be happy, they were pissed because they paid $5,000 extra to have a girl and a boy embryo, and they didn't want 2 boys. And the whole, pregnancy was just, a relationship gone sour. And she had to deal with these people that kept saying, who screwed up, who did something wrong, whose fault is this? We don't want a boy and a girl. We wanted a boy and a girl, not 2 boys. But when you get down to ordering your children by like a little, you go to the salad bar and you want the peas and your carrots and you don't want the mushrooms, and you don't want croutons, it's crazy.
It's wild. Oh, I forgot about that part.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, everyone, if you haven't already, you need to watch all of Jennifer's films. I'm going to link your documentaries in the show notes and the website and the articles that you recently published. And there's so many. Oh my gosh. Well, what can you give us a bit of a teaser of what you're going to be talking about in Austin? Kind of.
Oh, the short answer will be, how did medicine go so terribly wrong in the case of the gender affirming approach only that we're seeing here in the United States? So that's kind of what I'll talk about, and hopefully give some insights for how we can get back on the right foot again.
Right. And something that you talk about too, which we didn't really touch on, but that with the medicalizing of children, there is a whole new industry for third-party reproduction in terms of fertility preservation, or what's called fertility preservation, with quotes, as you just, talked about. Can you maybe just say a few words on
so
what that is?
I wasn't planning to weigh in on the transgender debate because it was sort of out of our lane. Our lane has been pretty hardcore in assisted reproductive technology. And then when we found out when children are either about to have their puberty blocked, or they're going to go on cross-sex hormones after they've already been through puberty, because we know both of those, blocking puberty and putting people on cross-sex hormones, damages fertility. These children are offered fertility preservation. So in the case of a child who hasn't gone through puberty yet, they don't have egg that are mature or sperm yet, but they have ovarian tissue and sperm tissue. So they'll actually do freezing of the ovarian and the sperm tissue, since they can't capture eggs. But for the children that are post-puberty that do have viable eggs and or mature sperm, they will actually freeze and bank egg or sperm. And these are young children who can't even imagine, do I want children? What is an egg or a sperm? I mean, can you imagine talking to a little 9-year-old boy and, do you want to freeze them? It's just crazy. And again, because we know that this is such high failure, that they're being offered false hope, and children can't consent. So it's overwhelmingly the parents that are giving permission to preserve their son or daughter's fertility. And just sort of all the mind games that goes. I mean, I've been doing a lot because I'm writing a medical journal article with a couple of other colleagues of mine on offering fertility preservation to transgender youth. And it's totally experimental. I mean, one area where we have a little bit of data is children that are cancer patients, that when we know that they're going to be put on chemo and or radiation as far as their cancer treatment, And in those cases, those children, we have some data on those children being offered fertility preservation, but it's only if we think the cancer treatment, the chemo and the radiation will harm their fertility. Because if it's a treatment that we don't think will impact their fertility, they're not even offered that at all. But we don't have a lot of data on that population of children, cancer patients, then going on, as they grow up and using their banked frozen egg and sperm to see if they can then have children. So it's totally experimental. And when you're talking about, a female body that's been taking high testosterone, and then it's going to try to implant an embryo in their uterus if they haven't had their uterus removed. So, what are the implications of the testosterone during the pregnancy on the developing fetus? It's a mess. So, yeah. And, we say you make a patient for life when you trans these people, right? And you make a double patient for life if they're going to want to then try to have a child down the road through fertility medicine. And that's very expensive. And it's just, these people need to lose their license.
It is just like that ripple effect. It's such a complex, so many intersecting industries and conflicts. And, I appreciate that. Yeah. What you're doing is just talking about that, the ethics behind all of this, that it's not just cool technology and doesn't mean we should just because we can. And yeah, so please, anyone listening, join us in Austin. You're going to learn more from Jennifer and our the other panelists. So I'll link that in the show notes too, to get your tickets to join us. Is there anything you wanted to mention before we close?
Well, I like to always try to land on some kind of a happier note when you're talking about such heavy things. And I do think that I like to use the phrase, it's not mine, Mother Nature always bats last. And we think we're so smart and so wise and we have it all figured out and we just embrace all this wonderful stuff. And we don't get to call all the shots. So I think if we can just have a lot more humility in our role on this planet and how interconnected things are and how delicate and fragile things are. So maybe more humility and just more respect before we charge off and we do things that have 5 and 10 years down the road and longer unintended consequences we couldn't even imagine.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or family member who needs to hear this content. And if you do share it on social media, don't forget to follow and tag me at Whose Body Is It? So until next time.